Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof.com. Welcome to the Dissenter Weekly for July 8th, 2021. We were on a break, and I can't say that it was relaxing and refreshing vacation time, but it was family vacation time, which is important vacation time. So it's good to be back with you. Fortunately, nothing happened. We don't have any material for the show this week. There's like no breaking. Actually, there's a ton. But before we get to the developments with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's extradition case, as well as some other whistleblower stories, Brian has some things for you to start the program.
Thank you, Kevin, and thanks for everybody watching. It's good to be back. Glad to be picking the show back up. Just your usual reminder to make sure that you are following us wherever you're watching. We do the show at this time every Thursday. And if you want to support the work that we do, we are a 100% reader-funded organization. All of our reporting is funded by folks like you out there watching who chip in $5, $10, $15. And you can go to shadowproof.com/donate. To see all the different options we have to give if you're so inclined. If you're watching on YouTube, you can give there. And at the end of the show, we'll talk about Kevin's newsletter, thedissenter.org, which is another option for folks watching if they want to support his work and get access to additional reporting. So without further ado, we've got some good stories here for this week. Let's dive right in. The first one we have here, EPA scientists expose tampering of risk assessments for cancer-causing chemicals. Why don't you walk us through the first story here, Kev?
Yeah, this is another important story, and it's coming from PEER, this group that represents public health officials and environmental protection officials in the government, and they are representing 4 scientists within the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. And some of this story comes from their submission to Congress about what these scientists have observed. But then also there's a really good report out from Sharon Lerner that was published on July 2nd before the holiday in the United States. Whistleblowers expose corruption in EPA Chemical Safety Office about managers who were removed, who tried to remove information about risks posed by dozens of chemicals, according to these whistleblowers. And it says that The Intercept was able to speak to these whistleblowers whose jobs were basically to identify potential harms posed by these chemicals. And there's a complicated process, but very basically what the whistleblowers were doing was they were faced with this pressure within the agency to remove evidence of potential adverse effects of chemicals, including the fact that they might cause neurological defects or effects, that they might cause birth defects, that they could cause cancer. And they're all supposed to go through this rigorous process under the Toxic Substances Control Act. And there's something called PFAs, which are known as forever chemicals. And those are all things that they're supposed to look at closely. And there's supposed to be warnings, and they're supposed to track these and all of this. But they were under pressure, according to these whistleblowers, to delete language that would identify these potential adverse effects. There were major revisions to reports that they were doing. There were risk assessments that were being reassigned to inexperienced employees, according to PEER. And what's very important for the organization and these whistleblowers to put out there is that this was something that did not start with Donald Trump and his administration. It was ongoing before Donald Trump was in office. It continued afterwards. Although the appointees, the people who worked in the office for Trump, made it worse, these people had issues before Trump took office, and those continued under President Joe Biden, despite the claims that he was not going to be anti-science, that he would let truth and science guide his presidency. These are problems that are happening within divisions of the Environmental Protection Agency who are doing the bidding of corporations, those who are involved in profiting off of the use of these chemicals, who would be impacted if they were labeled as hazardous or had the full description attached to them so that consumers would know. And also, this is important for workers to know, because workers are handling these chemicals and they are exposed themselves if the EPA isn't putting any kind of a risk or a warning on them. And so Sharon Lerner talked and was able to glean some important details firsthand from these whistleblowers. I'll go ahead and just read a part of a story from one of the chemists, Martin Phillips, who is a whistleblower in this, said that one component of a product that he was looking at was to be used in cleaning solutions. It's a chemical that causes birth defects and miscarriage in experiments on rats. And he and another risk assessor noted that the developmental effects in the chemical's hazard assessment, which must by law then be added to the chemical safety data sheet. But then the company that submitted the product for approval balked at the requirements. So they were supposed to go through this safety procedure. The company says, no, we don't want that. And the day after the assessment Phillips wrote was finalized, a representative of the company who had recently worked in the same division of the EPA, so they got some revolving door action happening, met with several of Phillips' colleagues and his supervisor, whom she had known from her time at the agency. And then Phillips was not invited to attend the meeting. The following day, another assessment of the chemical was uploaded into the EPA's computer system without Phillips's consent or knowledge. The new version removed the information about how it could cause birth defects and miscarriages. So it's a serious matter, something that has stakes for people out in the world, families, children, mothers, potential mothers, and this is what's unfolding. And so now they have brought this to the attention. Actually, Representative Rokana is helping them to bring further attention to this. But we know there was a significant amount of deregulation of chemicals under Trump, largely exacerbating a problem that, as these whistleblowers are pointing to, existed before Trump became president.
Thank you, Kevin. Our next story here, I had to read the headline a few times to try to make sense of it. It sounds like an interesting story. HHS Whistleblowers report that a fire and water damage repair company has been hired for migrant care. Why don't you walk us through this one?
Oh, yeah. So this has actually received widespread coverage in the media in the last 24 hours. Again, we're recording this on July 8th. So July 7th, this story began to get a lot of attention. It involves Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. So the two were contracted to do work, or were involved in doing work, Lori Elkin and Justin Miller. And they were there for about a month, a little more than a month, went through orientation. They were at this Fort Bliss facility where thousands of children are housed for prolonged periods in enormous individual tents. They were assigned to basically do line of sight supervision of these children. But the facility, the way they've got the area laid out for these kids that are unaccompanied minors, or they're undocumented migrants who are being put in this facility, it's line of sight. So they have bunk beds for the kids, and it's difficult to actually monitor the children because there are places that they can go and hide. So it's not like you always are able to see what the children are doing, which makes it hard to see what they're going through. If they're dealing with trauma or distress, it's hard to see who needs attention at any given time. So there's a whole host of issues that they point to in. But most importantly, what I think stands out from the submission that they made, and they've got the support of the Government Accountability Project in this, is the fact that they both point to the fact that the contract staff comes from ServPro. And ServPro is involved in making sure that this dormitory has proper supervision, or in this case, it's clear it's improper supervision and monitoring of what's going on with these kids. And they come from ServPro, which is a fire and water damage repair company. Clearly not a company that has any experience in childcare at all. It doesn't have to be migrant childcare. They could have been involved in doing preschooling, or they could have had some kind of connection to providing for the health and well-being of children, and they don't. They're involved in fire and water damage repair. And it says in their complaint that has been filed that many of the ServPro staff's t-shirts bore the ServPro corporate logo found on the internet, with some including the corporate logo, quote, as if it never happened, end quote. According to its website, the ServPro Industries LLC franchise system is a national leader of fire, water, mold, and other specialty cleanup and restoration services. Youth care, they point out, is not in its portfolio. Contractor staff told Ms. Elkin and Mr. Muller that they had received no training prior to beginning work and had little guidance about what their role was. So they don't even really know what they're supposed to be doing at Fort Bliss to take care of these migrant children. It's unclear of why they were brought in. It does not say in here why they were selected as the contractor, but many of these people seem to believe that they're doing crowd control and not youth care, in the view of Elkin and Muller, the two whistleblowers. They say that some of them mean well, but there are also contract workers that grow impatient very quickly. And there's one example in this submission about a contractor using a bullhorn and a siren to wake up children. So they don't have any experience with what it means to take care of these young kids. And then the guidelines are not great for what people are supposed to do. They are told that they're not to interact with children unless a child specifically approaches them, which means that, if you see something that's going on and you want to proactively deal with it, you can't address issues of depression, anxiety, can't deal with quiet children. These are people who the children don't speak English. So they may not really know how to engage these contractors, or some of them are volunteers. So how do you actually get into helping the children? How does the children get any help from these people if they can't communicate in English? How do they ask for medical attention? How do they ask for essential needs? How do they get anything that they might have to get from these staff members if they're not allowed to approach the children? So there's a lot in this submission that was shared with this is again going to be something that I think is brought to further public attention by congressional oversight, committee hearings, etc. That would be the idea. Also, Inspector General would be called upon to investigate. But there's a lot in this complaint that was put forward about the gross mismanagement going on as a result of this contractor.
Thank you. That's a really important story to highlight. Absolutely baffling. Let's move on here. We have 3 workplace cases resolved by OSHA in favor of the whistleblower. Why don't you tell us about these?
Yeah, so let me get this up here. Yeah, so these are good stories. Credit to Whistleblower Network News for covering these. I know that the Department of Labor and OSHA are constantly resolving, or should be constantly resolving, whistleblower cases, either in favor or against these whistleblowers. They were very slow. Despite the fact that they had a backlog, they really weren't doing much with these cases last year during COVID, and before they were still slow. So this pace should pick up. But we have first Midvale Paper Box Company. This is in Pennsylvania. According to the Labor Department, a worker at the company was fired for raising safety concerns and asked several times for safety gloves to operate a shredder and baler. And then a safety inspection was conducted in response to the complaint. This actually involved something back in 2017. So that's how bad the Labor Department is at handling these complaints. It takes almost 4 years. We're coming up on October 2021 now, so nearly 4 years, and that this was in response to a complaint alleging that the company failed to provide personal protective equipment and made employees unjam machines without implementing required lockout tagout procedures, and a worker had suffered a hand injury after the company denied a first request for safety gloves. And there's more details in here about how the worker was terminated after making multiple requests for gloves. Essentially, the agency assessed a penalty of more than $200,000 for 9 workplace safety violations, including a serious violation, 2 willful violations, and also 6 repeat violations. Then there is Equistar Chemicals, which is one of the largest plastics, chemicals, and refining companies. It involves an account manager who was placed on a performance improvement program and then fired after continually expressing concerns and objections about a proposed accounting practice that they believed was illegal. So this falls under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This is an act that became law after the Enron scandal, and it's an act that can empower many whistleblowers to come forward with this kind of evidence. And so this is an important case of a worker revealing workplace misconduct. Then there's CSX Transportation, which essentially this company was found to have violated the Federal Railroad Safety Act and then retaliated by firing a worker back in December 2019 for reporting safety concerns. So all 3 of these are, in some ways they're good news stories, but in other ways, because it takes multiple years for the worker to ever be made whole, we can imagine that what these workers have gone through over the last 2, 3, or 4 years, depending on which case we're talking about, that has been a grueling and unpleasant experience. And I don't know that in all of these cases they're going to be returning to their jobs, but it is important that the Labor Department is recognizing that something happened to them and validating their complaint.
Thank you. We are now going to turn to Croatia, which has overturned the extradition request for the British oil industry whistleblower. Catch us up on this story.
Yeah, so I don't know how many people tuning in recall that we covered this story before. So this is a positive update in the case, and the Croatia Justice Minister just in the last 24 hours overturned an extradition decision against British oil industry whistleblower Jonathan Taylor. Now, Taylor was arrested in Croatia after an Interpol red license from Monaco on bribery and corruption charges was issued in July 2020. He's a British whistleblower who provided evidence against the Dutch oil firm SBM Offshore in 2012, which employed him. And the Index on Censorship has supported him and praised his work for exposing, quote, a multi-million-dollar network of bribery payments made by SBM around the world. And Taylor cooperated with prosecutors in the United Kingdom, in the United States, Brazil, the Netherlands, and those investigations, according to the Index on Censorship, resulted in fines against the company to the tune of $827 million and the conviction of 2 former CEOs of this corporation for fraud-related offenses. But then Monaco targeted him, and he was unable to leave Croatia. And at the same time, the United Kingdom did nothing to protect him from this attack. They stood idly by. They still were standing idly by here as the Croatian Justice Minister took the action, and it will now allow Taylor to return home. So he's going to be able to go back to the UK. But he says in a statement that was that appeared in the BBC's coverage that he can't leave just yet. The judge has to look over the determination from the Croatian Justice Minister and then release him from his bail conditions so that he can get his passport back, and then he will be able to fly away from England, fly back to England, and no longer will he be trapped in Croatia. But just on a very light note, he is tuned in and watching the British team the UK's team as they make their run in the Euro Cup, and he's excited for the final. So he's going to be watching that on Sunday from Croatia. But obviously, he wishes he could be home to celebrate the success that they've had as a sports team. But in any case, it's a good and positive development in an extradition case that could have continued to look more like another extradition case we're going to be talking about here in a minute.
Yeah, why don't we round things out here now with our update on the saga around Julian Assange. We have the High Court allows U.S. appeal on limited grounds. Why don't you tell us about this and then take us into a little bit about what's going on at the Dissenter after that?
Yeah, so thanks again, Brian. And we finally got this decision that we had been waiting for, I'd say, for the last 4 to 5 months. And I think you might recall many shows where I sat here and said, we don't know when they're going to rule on the appeal. Could be any day now. And so for that time, Julian Assange sits in a cell at Belmarsh High Security Prison, and he waits and he waits and he waits, just like us, but it's far worse because he's in prison. And he's in a prison like Belmarsh where people commit suicide and there's mistreatment and there's lockdown conditions due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and you can't see and visit your family, et cetera, et cetera. So we finally got this appeal decision, and the High Court of Justice in the United Kingdom is going to allow the U.S. to appeal, but on limited grounds. And I do think that there is a silver lining here for Assange and his legal team, because what the U.S. government wanted to do was go after the credibility of Professor Michael Koppelman, who is a defense psychiatrist or doctor who had supported Julian Assange, who testified as part of his defense, who was one of the, if not the only doctor that diagnosed him with Asperger's and did a medical diagnosis that fully reflected his mental state, and what would happen if he was extradited to the U.S. and put in a jail or prison, and how that would result in further deterioration of his being, of himself, and how it might push him to cause self-harm, if not try to commit suicide. And they wanted to say that Koppelman was not a credible witness because earlier on in the case before the extradition trial, he was helping to protect the privacy of Stella Morris, who nobody knew at the time was Julian Assange's partner, but Stella Morris was also working with the legal team for Julian Assange's case. And this was not a fact that was brought out fully. And so basically one of the things that the U.S. government wanted to try to do is persuade the High Court that you could not trust Michael Koppelman as a doctor because he was not an impartial person. And they wanted to question the weight that his expert evidence was given by Judge Vanessa Baretzer in district court. And as it turns out, the High Court of Justice decided not to allow the U.S. government to go down this route. But what they are allowing is any evidence they want to put forward to question the way that the district court ruled when it comes to U.S. prisons. And also they're going to allow, it seems, the U.S. government to put forward these assurances about how they would treat Julian Assange if he is extradited to the United States, and to make assurances that they didn't even make back when we had the extradition trial. They didn't make them before. There was no opportunity for the defense team to contest any of these things that they are now saying they will do for Julian Assange. And I don't think we should give them any more weight than we would have if they had said they would do this before the extradition trial. So things like they're saying if he serves his sentence, there's a treaty that the U.S. has with Australia that permits the U.S. to allow someone like Julian Assange, who's an Australian, to serve out his prison sentence in his home country of Australia. But the fact remains that he should not be put on trial for journalism. And so, I mean, it's neither here nor there what they would do with him. If he was allowed to go to Australia, it doesn't make it any better that he's being prosecuted. Then they want to say that they won't designate him for special administrative measures, so he won't be in SAMS. They wouldn't send him to ADX Florence, but there are also a couple loopholes there that say that the federal government could decide to do it if he would meet certain requirements. But hey, we're going to say from the outset that unless he meets those requirements, we have no intention to put him in ADX Florence or to place him under SAMS. Well, you could have made that assurance back before the extradition trial, but the fact is that they did not do that. So this is where we are right now, and we're going to have the appeal hearing in the fall at some point, whether that's September or October, we do not know, but it'll be somewhere around that time. And in the meantime, there'll be plenty of opportunity through the Dissenter to explore some of these appeal issues that are going to be arising, and to talk about what has been resolved and what is not resolved as a result of the way the High Court of Justice ruled. And then we can also get into a little bit more, although I don't think it will have as much bearing as people think, but we'll be able to get into this key witness, Ziggy Thordarson, who was the subject of a bombshell report from Stundin in Iceland, Icelandic media outlet. And I didn't get a chance to really dig in and talk with you all about it because we were on the break last week. And so that's something that we will continue to talk in the context of the corruption surrounding this case. I think there's a lot of corruption in this, and as this falls apart, it's crucial for us to talk about the extent to which the case is not only falling apart, but also the extent to which it is built in such a way that is fundamentally corrupt, and that adds to the reasoning for why Joe Biden and his administration should drop the charges immediately, and why every day that they refuse to drop the charges means that they are losing credibility in the eyes of the world. And I would say losing credibility as people who want to speak about human rights and press freedom. The U.S. prides itself on lecturing other countries, particularly China, and I don't think that they can do that credibly as they continue to prosecute Julian Assange. So we will cover this at the Dissenter. I'm following a trial right now in Missoula, Montana, involving a drone whistleblower named Brandon Bryant, who has been put on trial for allegedly threatening city council members back in 2020. And so that is something that is unfolding. Actually, as we broadcast this show, that trial is taking place as we do this broadcast. And I'm going to get something together and do some reporting on the verdict as it comes down. We would expect it at the end of the week. If not the end of the week, then we would have it on Monday, but I would expect it to come down tomorrow on Friday. So there's a lot happening out there for us to follow. And, you know, there are these other whistleblower stories, the other whistleblower stories that we talked about today with the EPA and the Health and Human Services people who are working at Fort Bliss and doing migrant care. Those are important whistleblower stories. So there is a lot happening right now in the world of whistleblowing, and as well as with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. And you can support this work that we're doing to give stories like this attention by going to thedissenter.org and becoming a subscriber. If you're a subscriber already, please consider becoming a paid subscriber so that we can fund this journalism. I'd like to go beyond just me, and I'd like to hire other people to write and contribute, so I'm not the only one doing this work. I think if we can get more voices involved, we can cover more stories, and it means that there's much more we can produce, and we'll also be able to have a wider impact. Everyone talks about the blackout of coverage when it comes to Julian Assange's case, and there's others who complain about how the establishment media covers whistleblowers. Well, this is one small way that we can make a dent in this. And I see a question here, so I will answer it before I conclude. The question is, actually, I'm going to do this. what if the extradition request gets granted under these assurances, but once Assange gets extradited, the U.S. decide to not follow through? And I think that is the key question, because in the past, they have made assurances to these courts and they've gone back on them. In fact, the extradition trial against Julian Assange, that judge heard evidence related to a man named Abu Hamza, who is in horrible condition. Whatever you think about what he was accused of doing, he's in horrible, horrible medical condition. He has 2 prosthetic arms, and he's got diabetes and all kinds of other ailments. And his defense said that it would be cruel and inhuman to extradite him to the U.S. and put him in ADX Florence. And the U.S. government told the court that he wouldn't go to ADX Florence. In fact, if he went there, it would probably be very temporary and he'd be moved on to a medical prison because of his state. And he is actually doing time right now in ADX Florence. And he actually has a lawsuit against the prison for the way they are mistreating him. So everything that played out is exactly as the defense team feared. And this is what Julian Assange's team feels, that whatever assurances are put forward by the U.S. government, they will go back on them if Julian Assange is brought to trial in the United States. So I hope that answers your question. And I think we could wrap up the show. Thank everybody for tuning in. And I thank Brian for being here to do this broadcast and shepherd me along through these stories. Is there anything that you want to say about our work? I mean, we are still moving through our Marvel Cook stories that look at prison and other policing matters.
Yeah. Yep. Just the normal update. We've been I've been editing. I think I've been working on around 4 or 5 stories right now, and they're probably all going to end up publishing right around the same time. So I know that things have been a little slow on that end, but that's because we have people working on some really great stuff, some really great long form reporting, especially on looking at things that intersect with the abolitionist movement, both in the United States and around the world. So I'm very excited. Hopefully now that we are back in action after our little break, we'll start to see those trickle out in the coming week. But yeah, I'm just really grateful that everyone out there continues to show up for this show, continues to read and subscribe and share your coverage of the Dissenter and the things that we do at Shadowproof. So I just want to reiterate that thanks. And again, even if you can spare a few dollars here and there, you help make sure that we can keep it free for everybody and share things around and continue to grow these organizations and bring on more writers and things like that. Very difficult to do this kind of thing without starting off with a big chunk of money from major donors and institutions. So again, if there's coverage out there missing, if you're upset that there's things such as whistleblowing and movements against policing and incarceration that you feel like should be getting more coverage, well, you've come to the right place. If you could share our work and chip in a few dollars, we can help close that gap. So
there's just one more thing I want to quickly say, which is if you're looking at the way things are and saying, why don't we have more contributors yet at the Dissenter? I'm working on it. It's only been up for a month. There's only been a month that we stood up the newsletter at its new individual site. And there's stuff involved that we're still fine tuning. And then, in the next month or two here, we'll be asking journalists and writers for pitches to contribute their work. And so if there are any journalists or writers who are tuned in who want to reach out to me or to send something to newsletter@dissenter.org, they can do that and let me know that you're interested in writing about something, or that, if you are tracking a particular whistleblower story and want to do some coverage, let me know and we can discuss how to do that. And then let me just say thank you to people like Nathan and others out there who are tuned in, and you're all really great people. so you know, if you're a paid subscriber, this show gets posted as a podcast version for people who are paid subscribers, and then you can listen to it instead of having to look at our faces for 45 minutes.
That's right.
I mean, like the nice thing is you can get it downloaded and put it on your device and walk around and listen to it however you listen to your podcasts. And I think sometimes there are people who prefer that to watching videos. So
definitely.
Thanks for all the praise. I'm going to be on Status Coup with Gabriel Shipton, who is Julian Assange's brother. So you can look for that clip. We'll share it around. I'll share it around. But yeah, we would be back next week with another show, and I'll let Brian wrap.
Yeah, and again, just thanks to everybody who makes our work possible. Really appreciate it. And we will talk to you all next week at 4:00. Take care.